One of the things Darren and I get a lot of questions about each year is comparing banding versus broadcasting fertilizer. Hey, can I use less fertilizer if I band? Because that's what universities are telling me, soils labs are telling me. Can I actually do that?
We've gotten a chance to travel and speak around the world in different farming regions, and many people that I talk to in other countries say, wait a minute, you guys are raising the biggest crops, yet you're putting your fertilizer on in the most inefficient way. And I said, what do you mean? They said, well, aren't you planting your row crops generally on 20 to 30 inch row spacings? And I said, yeah, we are. They said, well, why on earth would you broadcast and put fertilizer everywhere when you only have a plant every 20 or 30 inches? Why wouldn't you just put the fertilizer right where you need it? Because you're spending more money than what you would need to fertilize for that crop.
Okay, so after looking at all these university studies and getting all these questions for many years, Darren and I started this project. This goes back about 13 years ago, and we decided, you know what, let's find out on a big scale if what they're saying is true. Now, we realize that things like nitrogen and sulfur, they're going to move in soil. So yeah, you might be able to cut back 5 or 10% by banding, but that's about it. And even that I sometimes question. But with phosphorus and potassium and zinc, some of these types of fertilizers that do not move in the soil or do not move hardly at all, that's where it appears, and from what universities and soils labs have said, hey, we can actually get by with less fertilizer when we band compared to broadcast. So anyway, what we did is we took roughly 500 acres and we did nothing but band for about 11 years. And we took roughly 500 acres and did nothing but broadcast for about 11 years. But when we broadcast, we put on 50% more P&K for 11 years in a row. Seriously. So some of these fields you would say, oh my goodness, wow, you spent a lot more money. Yeah, we did. We did spend a lot more money, and our soil tests went up. But here's the whole thing. We didn't gain really hardly anything in terms of yield. Now, eventually, I hope that we do. But I mean, I've already got a lot of gray hair. I'm going to have a ridiculous amount of gray hair before that seems to pay off, just in my guesstimation, because it was several $100s more per acre that we invested in total to do this study on all those broadcast acres. And yeah, so our soil test is a lot better. The whole thing is we didn't necessarily get everything balanced out. We didn't do everything else in the field maybe to take advantage of all that fertilizer. Maybe we will someday. Maybe we'll figure that out. But all I'm trying to say is, hey, we've proven on our farm, yes, the universities are correct when they say you can use about a third less P&K when you band compared to broadcast. But the way we like to phrase it is, look, you can take whatever you've got in the band, you're going to need roughly 50% more P&K in a broadcast.
Well, here's one thing that we've also noticed is drought tolerance. When we've got fertility placed deep below the soil, we're talking about 8 inches deep, and we plant our crop right over the top of that, when roots grow down, they're going to grow right through that fertility zone and thrive. We've got deeper root systems, we've got more well-developed root systems, and when we run into dry conditions later in the season, plants need moisture to bring in nutrients. If you've got all your nutrients placed in the top couple inches of soil, well, that's where it's going to dry out first. When we're about 8 inches down with our fertility applications, there's still some moisture down there, and plants are able to bring those nutrients in. And we've seen more drought tolerance when we apply fertilizer in a deep band versus broadcasting on the surface.
One of the reasons I believe that we're getting much more out of that band than the broadcast is we started by just banding and banding with the planter, but very quickly we switched over to the deep banding. So we're still banding, but it was now in a StripTill and deep banding, and I think that's why we're getting just as much yield out of that as broadcasting so much more P&K, because we've got our fertility levels built up in that 8 to 10 inch range, much greater, or really I should say 6 to 10 inch range. We're trying to put that fertilizer down at 8 to 10 inches, but you know how it is. There's going to be a little bit that's at 6, a little bit at 7, 8, 9, 10, all the way in there. But all I can tell you is, yeah, our top 6 inches, we're in great shape on the broadcast. We're in okay shape on the StripTill. But you get down to the next 6 inches, man, we're in fantastic shape on the StripTill, whereas on the broadcast fields, we have very little fertilizer in the 6 to 12 inch range.
And this really comes into play with the non-mobile nutrients. And Brian talked about things like nitrogen and sulfur that can move around in the soil. I don't really like to place those deep. I want to place things like phosphorus, potassium, and the micronutrients down deeper in the soil. That way, instead of relying on maybe decades worth of rain to try and move those down in the soil, we're going to move them down in one shot and just place them down low where we want them to begin with. The other big benefit of this is when we think about any kind of nutrients that move off the field. Like let's say we get a really heavy rain and it washes a little bit of topsoil with it. If you've got all your fertility right on the soil surface, you're going to move most of your fertility away if you have any erosion at all. When we're placing it down deep in the soil, nutrients like phosphorus, for example, that we're very concerned about, we've protected that from erosion by placing it deep. We don't have to worry about that. It's a really nice thing.
So the reason why we're bringing this up today is a lot of people late in the summer go to farm shows, field days, and they start thinking, you know, maybe I could do my fertility in a different way. If there's something you wanted to try this year, our suggestion would be think about maybe doing some StripTill, but not just StripTill. Deep place your fertilizer, band it, and then in terms of the fertilizer recommendation, hey, you got to look at 200 bushel corn removes X number of nutrients. Don't put on less than that, okay? We're not saying cut if you've already been down at the bottom end of where you should have been. What we're saying is look at what that crop's going to remove, put that on in a band. Now if you want a comparison, put on 50% more P and K in a broadcast. That'll get you fairly close. Remember, when you're banding, you have less tie-up of that fertility in the soil, and it's better placed, so chances are you've got that root system that can find that fertilizer a lot better, and those are the main reasons why fertilizer in a band is much more efficient than fertilizer in broadcast.
Well, the other thing I like about banding the fertilizer is you can keep it away from weeds like our Weed of the Week. We'll show you how to stop this tough weed coming up later in the show.